Gators Breakdown episode 76 is ready to go. Recruiting is on a streak right now, and joining me on this episode of Gators Breakdown will be Blake Alderman from Gatorbait 24/7. I'm your host, David Waters. We'll get into all that, all this recruiting, all this crazy news going on. Blake, it's kind of hard to keep up right now.
Yeah, I'm almost kind of scared to get away from my computer every day. Like my refrigerator is absolutely empty. I'm honestly scared to go outside. It's been that big of a week.
It definitely has. As a reminder, I'm your host, David Waters. You can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. Blake, where can they find you on the 24/7 network and on Twitter?
Gatorbait.net. That's the Florida Gators 24/7 site. We have tons of fallout from Friday Night Lights, the big week of recruiting. Obviously, we're getting ready to move into the fall season, and on Twitter, it's at Blake_Alderman, ALDERMAN.
Give Blake a follow there for all the quickest updates for all the Gatorbait.net articles and postings there. These guys killed it over Friday Night Lights over the past weekend, so I'm gonna give a shout out to them there. Blake, that was some big time work there that you guys put together, Luke Thomas and yourself there, and I just want to thank you guys for throwing all that info out there for us.
Absolutely, but I definitely have to throw out the biggest shout out to TG. He was the man, the myth, the legend. Me and Luke were out there holding it down at the camp, but TG is like our command center, and he's definitely the MVP of every big event that we run. So definitely he was a huge part of our success for Friday Night Lights. But we were glad to bring that kind of coverage to everyone apart.
For sure. And these guys help out Gators Breakdown a lot by letting us post on the message board out of the Gator Alley there. So good partnership we got going with those guys here. Reminder, before we dive in here, you can find all your Gators Breakdown episodes on SoundCloud, iTunes, and YouTube like you're viewing right now. Just search on those sites or get the links by following Gators Breakdown on Twitter and Facebook at Gators Breakdown. Please, when you're on iTunes, rate, review the show. Let Gator Nation know what they're getting with Gators Breakdown. Blake, let's start with a little bit of breaking news. The Gators landed their 14th member of the 2018 class from Booker T, Washington, wide receiver Tyquan Thornton. Did we see this coming at all? It was kind of a busy weekend, and that's necessarily maybe got looked over for him as a recruit. But, now standing on a Monday night, he's a Gator.
Yeah, he was actually expected to be in appearance for Friday Night Lights. He was also expected at Paradise Camp. He didn't make either camp. He had a 7-on-7 tournament that kept him away from doing both camps and coming up and visiting both schools. But it's kind of one of those deals now where Florida's got this big quarterback. They've got a ton of momentum. I've actually heard that Thornton has actually given Florida strong indications that he was leaning their way. Back in June when he was there for the 7-on-7 camp, he was offered then too. I mean, he was great. He's a little on the thin side, obviously needs to add some weight, but he's, got a big frame. He's fast, he makes a ton of plays. So, he was a guy that was really impressive during their 7-on-7 camp. So Florida, they pulled the trigger the next day after he spent some time on campus. So, they had felt really good about him from then. And it's kind of one of those things where Florida's rolling, spots are starting to fill up, wide receivers are, obviously you see them all on Twitter, they're all talking about committing soon and moving up their timeline and such. So, this was just a time for, a guy that Florida had been really high on to, jump on board and, get in place and, jump on the train. It's definitely rolling right now.
Speaking of that train, it definitely seems the wide receiver core right now that's, getting all these guys that are coming in.
Sure.
How does this all kind of shake out? Florida had a couple of 3-stars already. Now they've gotten Jamar Chase, is a big-time recruit from Louisiana, is in play now, and he's a commit. What happens here? There's a lot of numbers now at this wide receiver position, and I'm sure Florida's going to have to shake out somehow, some way.
Sure. I think there's a couple guys in the class now that I'm keeping an eye on just to kind of see how things play out. But, there's obviously a lot of guys still on board. Florida's still in pursuit of a lot of guys. So I think it's just more of just kind of reading tea leaves with what they're doing, so to say. But, you've got guys like Anthony Schwartz still on the board, Jacob Copeland. Those are, two guys that, like we just said, that were talking about moving up their timeline and making a commitment soon. So, it's definitely looking like limited spots at the wide receiver board. And it seems like there may be some play with the numbers there. And, it's something I'm obviously keeping an eye on just because when you got a high number like that, obviously – there's a lot of bodies there and you have to worry about numbers there. But definitely, it looks like Florida is rolling at the wide receiver position, adding Thornton, obviously Schwartz and Jacob Copeland still in place. So it's going to be an interesting couple of weeks with both of these guys, seemingly being on the verge of making a commitment soon.
But would you agree that's probably McElwain's biggest transformation since he's been here? Talking about a position that he has changed so much since he's come in. I think offensive line can be thrown in there a little bit. But this wide receiver core was kind of sad when he came in. And now, you're looking at names that, you can count on. And Antonio Callaway is, one of the nation's best receivers. And now you're making noise with Tyree Cleveland and Josh Hammond, Freddie Swain. And now the guys you just mentioned, this is a complete transformation since Jim McElwain's come in.
Absolutely. I think that and offensive line have really been more of the positions that McElwain has really put emphasis on, just adding kind of an arsenal, so you say. I think, to me, yes, the offensive line core was in shambles, when he got there. I mean, I think Mac always says, he had 5 scholarship offensive linemen, something like that. I feel like, yes, Florida's offensive line has come leaps and bounds, and there's obviously more talent. But I feel like just from a playmaking perspective is abysmal as Florida's wide receiver core was, and now you see all these guys making play. I just see that it being more of elite guys there, more guys that have made more of a splash, all the guys you named more as, this is the year that the offensive line can certainly take that step, with just the depth they've added. It seems like they've got a little bit more maturity than years that McElwain's been there. But, I think wide receiver, to me, like you said, is the most impressive just rebuild that the staff has done.
Blake, we'll get into the guys that have kind of committed, but it all started, right around Friday Night Lights. You were there around all that. What was the general feel of Friday Night Lights? Before coming in, okay, it was going to be good, but once we got to Thursday, once we got to Friday and these names started coming out, you got excited. Gator Nation got excited. What was the general feel, being around that event this past Friday or Thursday, Friday, Saturday? I mean, this is one of the best one in years. And I mean, honestly, could be one of the best ones ever.
Sure. I definitely think it's up there. I'm a little more partial to the years, Ronald Powell, Easley, Floyd, those were some dudes that were there, but, that does not give any discredit to this Friday Night Lights. I think that there was a ton of talent there. Obviously, the success, I think, could possibly make it jump that year with those guys I just named, just from the fallout from it. Maybe not as much as, the elite dudes that were there, but just the overall feel was great, and I think one of the things I noticed most was, there was a lot of guys out at this camp that, I've seen fans on Twitter that, they'll interact with me and talk. It was cool meeting some of these guys face to face, and it seemed like there was excitement between Gator Nation. You know what I mean? It's a big camp, obviously, for the coaches and the recruits, but it just seemed like there was more of a fan turnout. They came and watched. They were lining the outside of the IPF. They would go over to the swamp under the lights to watch the kids camp. So it just seemed like there was more hype, to the camp. It just seemed like the fans just had kind of a buzz about it. It's one thing to come up and drive up for a spring game, but, these guys are driving up for a high school football camp to watch the coaches and all the prospects. So, I think that it was just the overall excitement was something that stuck out to me, just from this Friday Night Lights to years past.
Definitely. So, and Blake, we know the new staff that came in, Sider, Bell, Davis, when those guys come in, are they a little more responsible for the kind of difference in this Friday Night Lights than the ones before? Sider is a big name. We knew when he was coming in, recruiting was going to be overhauled just a bit just by his reputation in the South Florida region. But now, I mean, is this more – did McElwain change much, or, did he give Sider some did he hand it over to Sider just a little bit more, to maybe change Friday Night Lights from years past?
I don't know that so much of changing it. I think it's kind of a team effort. I think that the additions that they have in the recruiting class, John Herron, Drew Hughes, a lot of guys that are in this recruiting office, Kevin Barbay, there's a lot of guys that work in the recruiting offices, and they did a really good job of getting these guys to show up on campus. It's one thing to have an impressive list of visitors. It's even more impressive to have the guys actually show up. Because that's the thing with a visitor list. You have to use words like, expected and, should be. But, to have that turnout, I think it shows that, that core of guys in there really did a good job. And obviously the coaches, bringing a guy like Juwan Sider in, him being the recruiting coordinator at Florida, obviously he's going to have his hand on a lot of things. And, I feel like him being in there, he brings more of a closer to the thing. It's not – these guys aren't waiting for signing day or a big ceremony or Under Armour game or whatever. It's a little bit more of having that guy to, so to say, seal the deal when these guys are on campus and riding that high of the visit. And, I think another thing too is, and it may be crazy to say this, but it's the presence these coaches have on social media. It makes more of a buzz. You know, every commitment story that we've done on GatorBait.net, I've had a Twitter fallout, you know, just the social media expectations and just things that coaches and, you know, all the gifs and memes and stuff, you know, that stuff gets buzz. It gets generated around, you know, the internet, and every kid now has a Twitter account and social media. And I think it just makes more excitement. You know, it certainly makes it more exciting from a fan point. And not going to lie, putting that slideshow together and having all those gifs and stuff are really funny to do. So if I'm having a good time putting this story together, I'm sure it's you know, to see the excitement from fans and commits and pledges and, you know, all these other things, I think it just, that whole aspect, I think, really kind of brings the dynamic more to Florida recruiting, just because it just makes more people interested, you know?
Right. If Gator Nation, if you want to have some fun out there with what Blake's talking about, definitely go follow Coach Hova at UFRC for recruiting coordinator _JH. So UFRC _JH, because as Blake mentioned, they're having some fun with it with these recruits, and that's one of them that the gifts are out there are pretty funny.
Oh man, they're 5-star gifts.
They definitely are. Blake, was this going into Friday Night Lights? I don't think it was expected, but was there any indication with what we've seen the last few days? Was there any indication the fallout would be the recruits flooding in from what we have seen?
You know, I think that there was some fallout expected. You know, there were some guys that popped. Dante Lang, Randy Russell. You know, those were some guys that I had on commit watch. But, you know, I didn't expect the fallout like it was, you know, and I think that chalks it up to really how big of a deal it was for Florida to get Matt Corral to pull that trigger and commit on the visit. You know, I don't think if you have him on board, I don't think you get, you know, a guy like Jamar Chase. You know, I don't think that Tyquan Thornton looks to kind of get his spot in the race of the wide receiver board now. But, you know, I just feel like that was really kind of the tipping point for Florida. You know, you get those 2019 kids. Wardrick Wilson, he was a guy that camped well. He looked good. Cam Williams was another one that looked good on Saturday. But, you know, these are 2019 kids. You know, Florida's always has that momentum, so to say, there with, you know, the kids they have committed. But this 2018 class really took off, and I think it really chalks it up to Matt Corral jumping in there. And I think that if he doesn't do that on Saturday when he pulled the trigger, I don't think you land and you have the fallout continue into the weekend and the start of the week now.
Blake, I'm glad you said basically where I was going next. You know, we knew what Florida was doing with the musical chairs of Corral, Justin Fields, and how maybe that could play out. You know, you're waiting on one of those two guys. In the end, I guess you really could say that Corral committing early and the staff not waiting on an answer from Justin Fields, in the end, this may help the class even more than getting Justin Fields 2 months from now.
Sure. And, you know, the thing with Florida was, yes, Justin Fields was probably the top guy on their board, yes. Matt Corral was not far behind him, I can assure you that. You know, they liked what they had seen from him back in the spring when they went to see him. You know, they knew what they were getting into. The off-field issues that are out there that people have mentioned, it's not really a concern to Florida. You know, they feel that, you know, that they've got a good egg in their basket. But, you know, and I think that they wanted to have a quarterback committed heading into the fall. You know, they really wanted to have that. And that's because that really gets the hype into your class. You know, you have more playmakers that, you know, they know what they're getting into. They know this is a guy that I'm going to be playing with. You know, he's going to be the one who's throwing me passes. You have a 5-star quarterback in there. That's your bell cow of your class. And that's one that Florida can hang their hat on. And it's certainly paying off now. And I think that was a big reason of why they wanted to get him to jump on board now to kind of springboard this momentum into the season.
Blake, you were around him. How did Florida get Corral to commit? You know, he was planning to visit Georgia. It was a Florida-Georgia battle after his decommitment from USC. And you know, what did the coaching staff do? What did they sell him on that he could, you know, that he needed to go ahead and commit to these Gators?
You know, whenever we saw him on Friday, whenever he got there for Friday Night Lights and he was hanging out, I mean, this kid was all smiles. You know, I mean, he was laughing, smiling. He was walking around and seeing, you know, all the commits, players, coaches. You know, he was cutting it up, and you know, he really just seemed to really kind of fit in and click. You know, that I think that was the thing that was the biggest takeaway from Friday, and it seemed like then, and a lot of just the kids in the class that were just kind of giving me feedback of what their thoughts were. They felt like Corral was in. You know, they that was kind of where we were Friday night. Then that night he did an exclusive interview with 24/7 Sports Tom Loy, and he said that Florida was his leader. that gave us a lot more confidence whenever you name a leader on the visit. Obviously, Florida's depth chart was really appealing to Matt. That was something that he kind of touched on over and over again, was that, Malik Zaire could have 1 year and then it's kind of wide open. Felipe Franks, Kyle Trask, Jake Allen, Kadarius Toney. These are guys that they're unproven, so to say. So, it kind of comes in for where Matt, he'll have a chance if he really shows what he can do. It was just a good situation for him, so to say. We were down between Florida and Georgia. Georgia's obviously got some guys in there, and Florida was a little bit more of, kind of a question mark in there. So that was something that stuck out to him too. But, I think also too, you kind of have to chalk this one up to just the relationship he had with Doug Nussmeier. Corral has said in the past that he really appreciates that Nuss isn't one to BS him. He was kind of up forward with him. He was straightforward and, didn't really pull any punches. He had told them from the very start that, Justin Fields has been our guy, but trust me, there is legitimate interest. And, I think they just played it right. And we had all heard Friday night that, Corral was still planning to visit Georgia this weekend, that was his intentions as of last Friday. But Saturday, he got a chance to spend time on campus all day. I was there all day for the camp on Saturday. I didn't see Matt anywhere. He was around with Nussmeier. I know that they went and toured some things and saw dorms and just kind of hung out. And really, Nussmeier really kind of took that to the point where he was trying to close this one. He talked Matt out of taking that visit. He sold Florida, on him, and it was, the rest is history from then. So, I think that it was really just the visit overall just couldn't have went better. And, it was just really just the whole thing just coming on him Saturday, and he knew that was the place to be, and the staff talked him into pulling the trigger.
Blake, another visit that seemed to go well was the wide receiver commit that came not too long after Corral and Jamar Chase. It looked like he was just waiting on playing with a big-time quarterback. You're going to we talked about kind of beforehand how much he enjoyed his Florida visit. And with him, you won't go back and watch some tape and some recent film when he was at a LSU camp. Great moves after the catch, like what I've seen from his route running as well. Now, how was Florida able to sell him on coming to Gainesville so quick? Is it, what happened before the Corral commitment, and was the Corral commitment just the final staple in getting him to Gainesville?
I think the Corral commitment had a big part of it, and it was a big staple of it because, bringing a 5-star quarterback into the fold obviously gets wide receivers interested because they know what's coming, and that's going to be a guy that's going to be throwing them passes, and it brings excitement to your program and your class. But, I think the thing was that, Chase was a guy that Florida really liked a lot. They had been trying to get into the mix with him, hadn't hosted him on campus before this past Friday. He actually last visited last year's Friday Night Lights. I believe it was last year's Friday Night Lights or the year before, one of the two, something like that. He had been there before, but it had been quite a while, long story short. But getting him there, kind of familiarizing him with everything. And he actually spoke to Luke Stampini that Sunday night whenever he committed. And one of the quotes that he said was, Luke asked him, is the possibility of Antonio Callaway leaving the NFL, did that pique up your interest to Florida? And he said, right. So take that as you will. But, it certainly seems that, Florida could be losing one of their biggest playmakers, and bringing a guy in like that certainly brings the interest in there because, Florida has shown that they're not afraid to play freshmen, and if you can play, they're going to show the field, especially at wide receiver. And I think that was one of the big things that interested him. He really enjoyed his visit. He has a really good connection with Tim Skipper, who recruits New Orleans really well. Has a lot of ties in there from being from that area. So I think that a lot of those things I just mentioned were a big part in kind of getting him to that tipping point. But I think adding Corral and having that face at your quarterback position really just pushed him over the edge. And Chase had left Gainesville feeling like he wanted to go to Florida, slept on it. The next day he still felt the feeling. So, I guess that staying power with having that big name at quarterback really was kind of the final blow.
Like we pretty much know this 2018 class is set up pretty nice now. And within the last week or so, Corral, Chase.
Top 10 now on 24/7 with the addition of Thornton.
There we go. So top 10 for the Gators on 24/7 right now with Corral, Chase, Dunlap, Pitts, Russell, Thornton, Lang, all recent commits, and more could soon be on the way. But I've got this question a lot, and I've seen it on the message board as well from you guys. Offense versus defense. It's just becoming an opposite Muschamp kind of class. Is this class being too focused on offense? What's going to happen on the defensive side of the ball?
I think they still have some names in play, but I think that a lot of things too is just kind of shows you that. Yeah, the coach here, he's an offensive guy, so, he's going to bring in his pieces there. But, Florida had a lot of young players on defense last year, so I do think that, seeing a lot of these younger guys, and obviously Florida signing so many DBs last year. I know that Tyson Campbell at one point had said, Florida signed a lot of DBs. Obviously since then, that's kind of been fixed over, and obviously he knows that there is a chance for him to play there. But, I think just having so many young guys that are going to get play time this year, I think has some defensive guys kind of playing a little cautious here. But I do think also that Florida has a lot of guys still on the board. And, yeah, a lot of these offensive guys may be on board now, and I think a lot of that has to do with adding a quarterback to the board. I think that kind of brings a lot of interest there. But, there's a lot of defensive guys in play, so I think that you can't say now, just from looking where the class is, that it's light on defense, because it's not signing day and they're going to continue to add guys. So, I do think that, yeah, it's maybe a little light on defense now just as far as heavy hitters, but there's still a lot of guys in play they're going to add, but they're going to add some DBs. They definitely want to add to the fold. I only think they really need one linebacker, just from kind of the haul they've had. So defensive end, there's quite a few defensive ends on Florida's roster, but you need to add a pass rusher every year. But, defensive tackle is one that they're still going to hit. They signed a pretty big haul last year at that position. So, I do think there are some pieces that they need. They're going to address those. But overall, linebacker, safety is kind of one that they've hit on pretty hard now. So, I don't think there's a huge need a lot on defense, maybe minus, 2 or 3 positions. So I think that that's something also to kind of think about as well.
Yeah, Blake, it seemed the player that was getting a lot of early flip potential from Friday Night Lights was Ohio State commit, American Heritage, defensive end Andrew Chatfield. Is the interest from him towards Florida legit, and does Florida have a good chance to steal him from Urban Meyer?
I'm actually thinking about putting in the crystal ball. I've been thinking about it. I've been thinking about it since he got offered. Everyone's like, well, he showed up at Florida's Friday Night Lights and not Ohio State's. Well, yeah, it's also in state as well.
Yeah.
So, I don't think that's – yeah, it's something to think about. But, it's obviously a lot closer to get to Gainesville, Florida than it is to go to Columbus, Ohio. But this is a guy that back before he committed to Ohio State, we had heard that he wanted to stay in state. So, I think having that offer – having, I guess, so to say, that pipeline sort of starting at American Heritage for Florida, I think it helps. He worked out. He seemed to have a really good time. I think he's a guy that Florida can flip. I think it's something that is going to happen. I've also know that Ohio State seems to be kind of adding some defensive end guys on their board. So I think that there's been some worry about maybe some in-state programs kind of coming in there eventually. So, I do think that a flip is possible. I have heard that maybe Andrew just wants to kind of go home and talk things over, see what's going on there. But it's one of those things that, it's with Andrew. I do think he flips, yes. I'm not sure that it's something that's going to happen immediately, but I do think it's something that will happen eventually, and I don't see it going too deep into the fall.
Got you there. Blake Alderman from 24/7, GatorBait.net, joining us here on Gators Breakdown. Blake, I had some followers on Twitter send some questions in. I got a few of those before we wrap up here, if you don't mind.
Let's do it.
All right. We'll stick to the defensive side of the ball, and since that's where we just ended with our little segment there. But you mentioned, maybe not many linebackers are coming in, but what are there any – and this comes from Jason R., Georgia Gator 22 – any big-time linebackers in the fold?
I think that the 2 guys that really stick out the most to me are 4-star Channing Tindall. He camped on Friday at Friday Night Lights. He looked great. He's exactly what you want a linebacker. He has the size, he moves well, he covers well. Obviously in shirts and shorts, you don't see a guy hit, but on film, he brings the stick, and, he can definitely be a guy that would be an early playtime candidate in Florida. I do think Florida impressed him on his visit, but I also think South Carolina is a huge factor. He camped there the Saturday after he visited Florida. And, they're obviously been the team getting a lot of buzz. I do think that Florida is a factor. I do think there's legitimate interest, but I am a little cautious with just how South Carolina has just done a good job with him thus far. I do think they're going to be a hard team to beat. David Rees is the other one. That's a guy that I can see kind of moving down the board. He's a guy that was supposed to be at Friday Night Lights. He had been on a kind of a tour of seeing a couple different campuses, but, he didn't show up on Florida like was expected. His older brother was a recruit. I believe it was the 14 or 15 class, something like that. And so he's been on visits with his brother, but he hasn't taken his own recruiting visit to Florida. So with him looking to make a commitment sometime in the summer, he's either going to have to kind of extend his timeline, or he's going to have to show up on a visit soon to really kind of be a legitimate target here. Landed an Alabama offer recently, had recently visited Michigan. So, I think they're in play. But, those are the 2 linebackers that at least I would be keeping an eye on right now.
How funny would it be for Florida to have two linebackers named David Rees? So,
I know, right?
You may have already answered this with Chatfield, but Greg Milliken sends this tweet at Gator Milliken, who is likely on commit watch on the defensive side of the ball. Would you go Chatfield?
I would say Chatfield. That would be the guy that I would say. I think another guy that Florida has a good shot with too is, it seems that if they do get Chatfield, I would say that Nesta Silvera is a guy that I would keep a closer eye on as well. Cousin of James Houston, the current linebacker at Florida. He's a Miami commit. Seems very solid to Miami, but I do think Florida is in there. That would be another guy that I would keep an eye on too. Just he's an important guy. I don't think that if Chatfield flips, early, I don't think that Silvera is right after, but I think that would be a guy to keep an eye on for sure.
Yeah, that kind of goes to the next question from Dustin Woolbright at D. Woolbright. Blake, who do you think are the defensive line recruits on the board that we can get? So you just mentioned one there.
Yeah, Chatfield, Silvera, I think, are another guy. Dante Steele, I do feel he has real interest in Florida, the 4-star defensive tackle from West Virginia. I do think that West Virginia is a huge factor. His dad was like a superstar there. His older brother is, I believe, is a true freshman at West Virginia. So they're going to be hard to beat. Having family there, they can come and see him play. Florida's far away. So, I do think that there's a dynamic there, but Stills keeps saying that he's going to take a visit sometime soon to Florida. I do think if that visit goes well, Florida can really be squarely in the mix. I think he has real interest, but it's one of those things he's going to have to visit to really to be on my realistic board, so to say. Malcolm Lamar, the 4-star from Sefner Armwood, I think he's a guy that does have interest in Florida. I know he didn't put Florida in his top 5, but he still plans to visit Florida. He's still talking with the staff, so I don't think you can cross him off the list just yet. Oregon seems to be kind of the team in play. He has a teammate committed there, even though I think that teammate will eventually flip to Florida State. I do think that he's in play for sure. Taylor Upshaw obviously is committed now. Silvera, Chatfield, I think that's kind of really the ones that I'm keeping an eye on right now, at least on the defensive line.
Gotcha. Now a few questions focused, of course, on quarterback Matt Corral from Kevin Johnson at Johnson KM. We all love Field's ability, but does Corral provide more vocal leadership / swagger on the field? Field seems more like a quiet guy. You've been around him, especially this last weekend. Would you kind of say that might be the case?
I'd say a little bit. Matt is very confident. He's very Rex Grossman-like to me, to where he just has that loud personality, and he'll go out on Saturday and he'll battle. I think that's one thing. He is more vocal, but I do think also that, Justin Fields is very well known in the Southeast. So I think there are going to be that dynamic to where he doesn't have to do the talking. If he commits to a school, guys are going to take notice. But, I do think that Matt does definitely have the swag. He definitely likes, he's the pretty boy quarterback, so to say. So, I think that he does bring some swag to the class. And if you follow him on Twitter, he's definitely, doing his part recruiting.
For sure. Yeah. And kind of taking some shots at some rival schools as well.
Sure. Yeah, he's bringing it all out. Guy's been committed for 2 days and is already taking shots.
There we go. Tigger7, Tigger on Twitter, asked this, and we kind of know there is a difference between what we see in helmets and shoulder pads and when you dress for a game versus what you see in 7-on-7 camps, when they're throwing in their underwear. But a lot of people want to ask, why is Justin Fields considered a better prospect than Matt Corral? And it kind of, you go to see a lot of people want to compare what they've done in uniform compared to what they've done on these 7-on-7s in these camp circuits.
To me, I do think that obviously the rankings are something that changes, every so months or whatever, however, when they update it. So, to me, fans that are, worried about rankings and whatnot, the ones that really matter are the final rankings. It's where things play out. Obviously, rankings are something that fluctuate, and whenever the pads do come out, trust me, the rankings will still be updated. That being said, 7-on-7 is something that plays to the quarterback's strengths. You don't have the pass rush. Yeah, you don't have the timing down that you maybe do with your teammates and such, but, you do practice and you get a chance. But the lack of a pass rush, it really kind of plays to the quarterback's strengths. And I think that when you see the kind of success that Justin Fields had at just about every camp he had, he was lights out at just about every time he threw at a school, every 7-on-7 event. He was great at the opening, didn't throw an interception the entire time. He put up numbers that were some of the best in the opening history. So, I think you bring that in there. Then you also throw into the fact, too, that Justin Fields is a dual threat, so to say, quarterback. He was throwing, he's got a great arm, and he shows that off in 7-on-7, But this is a guy that's not even using his legs in 7-on-7, and he's still killing it. So, you put on the pads, and this guy is, 220 pounds. I mean, he's a running back whenever he lowers his shoulders. So, I think that the fact that he's putting up this kind of performance and not even playing to one of his biggest strengths, I think can show when the fall comes, what Justin Fields will be able to do and where he can take his game to that next level. And also, too, you throw into the fact that Justin Fields' high school he's at, they're not a perennial powerhouse. I believe that Justin's first year in varsity was last season, and I want to say that they had one of the best records in high school in his high school's history. So you bring in that kind of player, and they always say the best quarterbacks make your team better, and I do think that Justin showed a lot this summer and this offseason to prove that he is the number one guy.
Couple more, Blake, and then we'll get out of here. Does the addition of Corral help with guys that we may not have been talking about, guys that we may have not, seen on the radar before Friday Night Lights? I know we've kind of hit this question a little bit, but is there any guys that maybe we haven't talked about that could now be in the fold?
One guy that kind of comes to mind is his teammate Jalen Hall, the top wide receiver out in California. That's one that can come in play. Obviously, Florida's going to have to get him on campus, and distance is a factor there. And I don't think that it's something that, is absolutely going to happen and is a slam dunk, but I do think that there's going to be more interest in Florida because of the fact that he's going to have a teammate in his ear and there's going to be some exposure there. And, hey, Jalen, I'm going to Florida for a visit. Do you want to come with me? I think that can obviously open up a door for Florida there. But, besides Jamar Chase, I think that, Jalen is really the one that jumps to my mind. You had a guy that Jamar Chase that probably wouldn't have committed to Florida had Matt Corral not been committed there. So, that's the one name too. But, I think Jalen Hall is really the one that comes to mind for me.
Blake, and I don't know if we can peek ahead a little bit, but this comes from and the last question came from Matt Peters, Matt Peters 86 on Twitter. Will Miles from at Will Miles SEC. If we look ahead a little bit, does his signing affect the 2019 class at all? Are there some wide receivers, tight ends, or offensive guys that maybe come to mind?
What do you just mean, guys that could commit from 2019?
You're right. Yeah, from seeing Corral, being a 5-star quarterback that they'll be playing a lot of their career with.
I don't think that there's really anybody that jumps out to my mind in the 2019 class. I think the 2019 class is its own beast. I think that they've got enough recruiters on their own, and you follow those guys, and they're very vocal. And I don't think that there's necessarily anybody that's going to jump on board because of the Corral effect. But I think that the fact that Florida's 2019 class is, was 1, and I believe now they're ranked 3, but just the fact that they've had so much success, I feel like that gives them enough buzz on the recruiting trail on its own.
I completely agree there. That class is very off to a very nice start. Maybe that was the first kind of sign that we would know that, hey, this Friday Night Lights may be a little bit different too, because that, looking ahead to 2019, that may have been kind of the look ahead to say, okay, recruiting's changing just a little bit.
And trust me, those guys were out there recruiting too. I saw all those guys out there at midfield, and they were talking to 2018 guys too. So just because those guys are underclassmen didn't mean they didn't take any of the effort away from their chance of recruiting guys.
Sounds great. Blake, thanks for joining us here again and sharing your Friday Night Lights experience and all the recruiting stuff that's flying around. And we know it's left and right now. And I know you're busy, but really thanks for joining us here on Gators Breakdown.
Yeah, man, anytime.
All right, with fall camp coming up, we'll be sure to get Thomas Goldcamp. I know he's going to plans on joining us here and give a preview of fall camp for the Gators coming up. Starts next week, right, Blake? Next Wednesday or Thursday?
Yep, that's correct. 1st of August, I believe, is right around when it starts.
Sounds good. So remember, you can find Blake on 247gatorbait.net and get all the great articles there. Believe me, guys, you probably want to check it out some more later this week as well. So I'm sure the recruiting news isn't done by any shot of the imagination. So for Blake, I'm Dave. Thanks for listening to this episode of Gators Breakdown.